We live in communities, families, friends, colleagues, even the online groups we spend time in. Communities are how humans have always survived. But what does it really take to build a community that lasts, to create belonging in a world that, especially now, feels disconnected? That's where Tim Falls comes in. He spent his career building authentic communities in tech, from unicorns such as DigitalOcean to SendGrid, and he shows us what it means to bring people together with purpose. From there, we'll look at how communities don't just live in groups or meetups. They also live in books, in sports like horse racing, and even in medicine. Now, at first, these worlds feel completely unrelated, but together they tell us something essential about the future. Now, I know I just got you right out of your hike with indigenous people in on a mountain in California, which I actually forgot the very name of what you just told me. Tell us a little bit about that experience, but also, with your work with indigenous people, what are some of the things that one can learn about building communities from kind of very, very old cultures like that from indigenous people?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that question. Um, and it was Mount Shasta in Northern California, pretty close to the Oregon border. And the indigenous folks that I was with were from the Shipibo tribe and the Keros tribe, which who are both from areas of Peru, and the Shipibo being in the Amazon jungle, and the Keros being in the mountains in the Andes. Um, and that affinity for the mountains was why we took a journey to Mount Shasta. And yeah, I've been learning from indigenous people since I was a child, actually. My parents were activists for Native American rights and owned a gallery that featured art gallery that featured Native American art. And even as an adult, that was kind of my roots of this learning and this interest. And as an adult, I've worked with various tribes, mostly here in North America, Turtle Island. From a volunteer standpoint, an activist standpoint, just really doing what I can to support them. And what I've learned about community through all that work from them specifically is, really the fundamental necessity of community. Um, most of my career, the last 15 years, when I've talked about community, I've been talking about it through the lens of a business. Been talking about community as a business strategy, as a team within a department, within a corporation. And it's beautiful that companies have been and are increasingly investing in community, because at its core, I think community is all about relationships, interconnectivity, relationships that create a network and a web of people. Um, and and it's really, really lovely that businesses are seeing the value in that, and therefore hiring people, and you can make a career out of um, fostering relationships amongst customers, for example. And at the same time, what is really, really highlighted through learning from indigenous cultures that have been around for thousands of years and are still thriving today, despite having to survive lots and lots of oppression and attempts at genocide and whatnot, is that community is essential. Community is our lifeline. Without community, we don't, we have a harder time surviving as humans. And I think that ultimately, businesses also have a hard time surviving and thriving without community as well. I mentioned customer communities earlier, which are oftentimes kind of how community manifests in the corporate environment. But there are also employee communities, right? Like there are community professionals who are focused on internal community. So they're creating connectivity, relationships, like creating opportunities for relationships to deepen and broaden throughout their organization so that their people work well together, right? And so that the operations of the business are smooth and efficient and enjoyable and fun, so that they retain those employees and they get the highest performance out of them they can. Um, and yeah, and then other times it's like someone inside the company building community and interactivity and connection with customers or between customers and employees, right? Um, but usually we think about that as like a nice to have,
Mm.
right? These relationships are beneficial but not necessary, and um, and I think yeah, that's the real learning from the ancient and still relevant concepts around community that I've learned from indigenous people is it's we need this. We really, really need it to survive and to get by and to thrive. And I think right now, especially if you're probably if you're living anywhere on planet Earth, but I can speak from the perspective of living in America, it is in my 42 years and the memory that I have within those 42 years, it is the most divided and divisive state of affairs that I've ever witnessed. And what is the opposite of division?
Mm.
It's togetherness and connection. And that's what you find in community. And I think that anybody in America right now can see, like, can imagine a future where this division gets even worse. And um, I think that this lesson from ancient wisdom is as relevant today as it ever has been, and that
Hmm.
like, hey, to not go down those the
Mm.
worst imaginable path possible, we
Mm.
need to come together back to community, and that's gonna be what helps our species
Mm.
thrive and our families and our friends live happy lives. Yeah.
Mm.
So I know that's it brings it down to an existential thing, and very basic, but I think it's something that we don't often
Hmm.
re- keep in the forefront of our conscious awareness. And so I think it's worth naming. Um, yeah.
100%. And we're going to get into the practical design and the management of communities. Uh, Even on a macro level, and while we stay there, what is the difference though between a community? And I agree with you the importance of it, but how is a community different? Different from, like you said, right? A team or a group or an audience. From a macro perspective, how is it different? Is it the engagement? Is it a feeling? How would you define just a group of people versus a community?
Hmm. Yeah. Groups of people can come together in lots of different ways. When I see a group of people coming together as a community, the defining characteristics of the community, what shows me community in a group of people is number one, participation. So you mentioned audiences, and one key difference between a community and audience is an audience is observing.
Mm.
They're watching, right? They're not necessarily participating in what they're watching. And so at one very core element of community is that people are participating, not just lurking or seeing or watching other people do, but they're getting involved. Um, and then once that participation is happening and people like a critical mass of the people who would be considered members of the community or who are in that group, a critical mass of them are participating, the next key element, especially of a sustainable and a vibrant and healthy community, is reciprocity. And that means that when one is participating, they're doing so with an intention to contribute and add value that can be shared, that value can be kind of received by other people in the community. And they do so either because they've already received value from the community and they want to complete the cycle of reciprocity and give back, or they haven't done that yet, but they see an opportunity to contribute, to add value, and they decide to do that without an expectation or an attachment to an expectation that they will be paid back, right? That said, like, while they may not be attached to an expectation of if I give, I will receive, they also know that by giving, they are heightening the opportunity or the possibility or the probability that they will receive in return. So that reciprocity and the intention to give, knowing that you might receive back, but you might not. And when you receive back might be days from now, months from now, years from now. It's not like a transaction. It's an exchange of value, but the timeline is unknown oftentimes. So community to me is identifiable by participation, reciprocity, and yeah, the ability to see like those things exist because the people participating in them feel an extrinsic and intrinsic motivation to be a part of it, right? They have common interests, so like just that, like being amongst people who have common interests in that as they have, or common values that they have, like that's intrinsically valuable in and of itself. But the more they get involved, the more value they get out of it, and the more motivation they feel to continue to be involved, continue to collaborate. So yeah, and I think those are the top things that I look for when trying to differentiate groups and communities.
This brings me back to a lot of the give first vibes that our mutual past history of Techstars kind of kept on saying. And drilling further into kind of the more practical concerns. So, I'm trying to start a school community with the Automated, which is kind of where I teach AI. Also have a Patreon community. How long does it take to build, a well-functioning community, right? One that people are engaged and people are willing to reciprocate, and I guess there's also this flywheel of reciprocation, right? The more they give, the more value they give back. How long does it take, as someone that's about to start building a community? How long would it take to build something like that?
It really depends. I'd answer that in a range, like an approximate range. In rare instances and very unique instances, I think that you could have a community you could see a community kind of come out of the woodworks and flourish in an immediate way in a day or a week or more likely a month. And that's possible. I'll say that's possible, but emphasize that it's not common and it's not like the average if you were to average it. It can also take years. But I would say, like, in most cases, it's going to take a good 3 to 6 months to really have the vision for a community, start doing the work to foster it and to bring people together and to cultivate it, and to then see people really doing that participation thing, voluntary participation because they find value in it, reciprocity, and then other more mature things that I didn't name in the last question or in my last answer that you often see in communities as well, like norms or
Mm.
agreements, community agreements where everybody understands, like, here's how we need to show up in this community to for it to be healthy and for it to be a healthy, fruitful place for me to hang out. And so um yeah, I think that's kind of my short answer is like at least 3 to 6 months. And even in those cases, right, like your group of people who are now a community might be 5 to 10 people,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
The
mhm,
last community that I built from scratch on my own
mm,
was a community called Climate Friends, and I operated it for about 2 years in earnest, and uh, but it kind of hit its peak around the 1 year mark. And at that time, we had about 100 members with about 30 to 40 of them active on any given week.
mm,
Um, and I think the ramp up to 100 over 12 months, I probably hit like 50 members a little short of 6 months. But even in the first month, when we
mm,
had 10 or 20 people in there, um, it was already a community because people were exchanging value, and coming back because they wanted to come back, and deciding to upgrade from free to paid because they were getting enough value out of it, that they were willing to exchange dollars for it. So, um, but I think from a business standpoint, you really want to give it time. Like you don't want to think about community as an overnight success or a next day thing. You need to be giving it. If you're starting a community strategy as a business, if you're not giving it at least 12 months to gain momentum, then you're not giving it enough time. You're not giving it a fair chance, I would say.
And how would you break that down a little bit more? How would you kind of start defining those components of the community in the sense it sounds like there's the leader, the person that starts it. It sounds like there might be kind of early members that form some sort of kind of momentum or nucleus, and then you've got kind of maybe mid-stage followers and then kind of late stage. Is that the way to think about it in terms of the people and the stakeholders that you need to build a proper community?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of thinking about it. And I think I would point out a nuance to that, which is time in the amount of time someone has been in a community isn't necessarily correlated to their role in the
mm,
community.
mm,
Um, and what I mean by that, for example, is that you might have someone who joined the first week the community existed, the first week the doors were open. And 10 people joined, right? And of those 10 people, five of them kind of emerge as leaders. And I'm just I'm just putting five out there, not I'm just naming that, not because I think it'd be a 50-50 ratio. I'm just using a number here. Um, but 6 months down the road, you might have those leaders who like emerged in the first month or two, might have kind of faded away, and you might have somebody who joins 6 months in, and or you might have a cohort of people who join 6 months in, and there's five of them, and one of them becomes a leader immediately,
mm,
and the other four uh, don't become leaders at all, right? So what I'm trying to point out here is that someone can step into a community and become a leader pretty quickly if they want to, you know. That said, longevity, while it might not determine roles or leadership positions, it does have an effect on it. It has an impact on it, right? If someone's always been around, they're always leading and they're always contributing, they're always supporting other members, other people see that happening and they see it happening over the long term. Like, you know, that earns in the eyes of all members who are observing, that earns respect and appreciation. And really, like, leaders emerge because of their activity, because of their action, because of their participation, because of the impact that they have on other people. And sometimes they emerge because their leadership is naturally and easily identified by other members, and therefore kind of like the people elect or like bring leaderships to leaders to leadership. And other times, you know, again, speaking back from a company's perspective, it might be the community team or a community manager, and the founder of the community is the one who sees the leaders emerging. Because, you know, in some contexts, hopefully that leadership, organic leadership, can be observed by any members, but sometimes managers or founders can have a different insight and can have more and greater signals to identify like that's a leader, and can then through their position as a community builder or manager, you know, put structural things in place to help that person kind of grow into a more official community leader capacity, like an ambassador or a moderator or an admin or something like that.
Now, the leaders in this in a community, and oftentimes, I guess, in the beginning, it could kind of mean, let's say, in a business kind of context, the founder, and to some degree, it's also maybe the early members as well. How do leaders kind of take a look at their role across the life cycle, to your point, of a community? You know, should they in the beginning be a little bit more active and maybe starting the discussion, but then towards kind of the middle or towards the I wouldn't say end, but towards the middle, a little bit later on, kind of back away and let other members kind of surface up, right? And try to reward and champion other voices. How should leaders conduct themselves within a community over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an important question, I think. And the answer for each leader who is asking themselves that question, like, how should I show up on any given day, or how should I show up in month 1 versus month 6? The answer to each of those, or to those questions for any given leader, is going to come from their intuition. And they're going to need to be really attentive and really tuned in to the dynamics of the community and to what roles other community members are emerging into and stepping into, right? In the very, very early stages, a leader or a founder might need to be, and usually needs to be, overly active, right? They need to make sure that when someone arrives in the community, if it's an online space and, you know, it's kind of a 24/7 type thing where people maybe log in at any given time of day, or if they come into a virtual community and they ask a question, for example, right? Like, in its early stages, there are fewer people compared to a later stage to answer that question, right? And as a community founder, the last thing you want to do is to have a member be discouraged by not by asking a question, for example, and not getting an answer, right? And now, like, you can, again, you can refer back to norms, right? Like, an answer, you might want to set the expectation and a norm for your community members to say, like, hey, you know, if you ask a question, you're not going to get an answer in 2 minutes. You're going to get an answer in 4 hours, right? On it, right? And using that kind of intention to inform your actions and your decisions. So it's like, hey, I want people to know that when they come in and they post something in this community, whether it's a question or just a share, that they're going to get some attention and some engagement with that within 2 hours, let's say. In week one, I might kind of over index to like a lot quicker than 2 hours, right? To just like not to give them a false expectation that they're going to get stuff in engagement within minutes, but to like to let them know very early that people are here. Your voice is being heard. You're not being ignored. You're not alone here, right? There are other folks here.
That's probably the worst, right? In the early stages of a community.
Yeah.
Crickets.
Crickets are a dangerous thing in the early stages of the community. So yeah, a leader in the very, very early stages is one who makes sure that the crickets are quiet. And now that I'm talking about crickets, I'm remembering you mentioned the cricket ambiance around me. I'm appreciating their sounds right now. Which is to say that crickets aren't always bad.
That's right. That's right.
But to finish that line of thought, right? As you were alluding to there, you want to find a balance as a community leader to not jump in too quickly so that you do give opportunities for other members to answer questions. Or if you jump in quickly, do it so that the person who asked the question or shared the thing gets immediate attention, but also do it in a way that invites other people to weigh in as well, right? So that the answer you give or the response you post to the original sharer isn't a one and done answer. It's a, hey, here's what I think, here's what I have to add. But this community member I know through my relationship with them also has experience that's relevant to this question. So I'm going to tag them and bring them in, right? And so that's even more so than answering the question or responding to the or reacting to someone's share. Yourself as a community leader, it's a you need to know everybody in the community in the early stages so that you can be the connective tissue and ping people when you see the thing that they would add the most value to, you know. And again, as you were alluding to, like, if everything's going well over the course of time and you're taking that approach, theoretically a leader is going to be able to kind of fade further and further to the back, and members are going to be able to gain more and more, have space for more and more participation and gain more and more motivation to participate and feel in themselves their roles shifting into leadership roles pretty organically. And yeah, and another thing that the leaders need to do there is celebrate participation, celebrate and support the people who are gradually stepping into leadership roles, to nudge them and keep them going in that direction. You know, recognition and celebration are really, really important in the early days to make sure that, you know, everybody who contributes, everybody who participates feels that it was worth it. That the people are grateful for it, that it was heard first and foremost, but also appreciated and respected and valued. Yeah. So, and then I think that cycle happens many different times because you have multiple leaders, right? And you can have a community of 100 people could have 5 leaders or it could have 20 leaders, depending on the nature of it.
Last question, zooming back a lot now, I think kind of talked about what's going on in the United States and the need for, I guess, community leaders. What communities or community groups or leaders kind of inspire you now that you say they're doing an absolutely fantastic job, and that's kind of the model or that's the best practice that we should all learn from, and that the kind of the audience members can tune into and try to learn something from them as well?
Mm-hmm. I'll try to be brief and give 2 examples. One from the for-profit technology world and one from the nonprofit technology world. Technology and then some on the nonprofit side. On the for-profit technology side, a company that I think is doing community exceptionally well is Major League Hacking, or they're often called MLH. MLH was founded about 12 years ago by a couple of friends of mine who I had worked with who were in developer relations, which is kind of what I describe developer relations as a genre of community building. And they started this company, MLH, to basically be the NCAA for college hackathons. So it's literally a league of hackers who are participating and competing in hackathons on college campuses. And they started just in the States and they've expanded throughout the world on other continents. And it has, I think because of the founders' roots in community building, community has been central to their whole business strategy throughout. And they've built a global, thriving community of college age developers that is, I think, really, really special and unique. You don't see very often. And I think one of the most unique things about it, and one of the ways in which its strength is exemplified, is that their members are college students, which inherently means they're only going to be members in the biggest way for 4 years, most likely, or fewer, right? So the lifespan of an average community member for them theoretically is 4 or less years, which means that there's a lot of turnover in this international community that they're building. It's both a challenge and an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity in that each year a new batch of students comes in, and that's a new group of community members who can come into it. It's also an opportunity on the exiting side, because when someone kind of graduates literally and figuratively from the community, they're also going on to jobs most likely, and they're probably going to be like ambassadors or advocates for MLH because it touched them and it impacted them. And so if they come across a college student who they think could benefit from it as well, they're going to refer them over to that. But it's also a challenge because, you're that turnover that, you don't want to necessarily fully retain community members, because that means they're not getting out of college and they're not moving on to a full-time job that they want. It is one of the reasons why they're getting involved in the first place. So I think the company's longevity of being around for 12 years and just growing and growing and growing in terms of staff and in terms of number of universities, in terms of the companies that they're working with, Google's and Microsoft's and GitHub's and like every big tech company wants to work with them. And right now, in this time of AI being like a huge wave that everybody's trying to get on the crest of and ride and understand and stay on their board, NLH is like so dialed in on what AI means for developers, what AI means for professionals. And that's one of the reasons why their student members are so happy and so engaged. And it's also one of the reasons why the corporations that they partner with who want to reach those students are so happy and engaged, because their executives need to understand what all this is about. And, they're currently doing an AI roadshow in different cities around America, and it's been really successful. Like people are filling the seats, and yeah, it's, I think if you look them up, you'll be able to see and feel, and especially if you go to one of their events, even as an observer, you'll be able to feel and sense the magic of community that they're building there. And then really quickly on the nonprofit side, there's an organization that I volunteered with earlier this year called Program Earth. And they're also working with young developers through a fellowship program, and it's a free fellowship. So people who are coming into it as fellows, and that's their role in the community, they're getting education for free for 10 weeks. And they're learning from mentors who are working at all these big tech companies, GitHub and Microsoft and Google and Twilio and you name it. And what they do to provide a learning experience for those students through this fellowship is they partner with indigenous tribes who are trying to conserve and preserve and protect their lands and their natural resources like waterways and air quality. And they create open source projects that will be useful in those indigenous tribes' efforts to conserve and protect their land, that the fellows in their program and any other members in their community as it grows can contribute to. So the learning space is these open source projects, which have a real world use and implications. And so those are my two kind of, I don't know if I'd call them opposite sides of the same coin, but they're two pretty different, but also very similar now that I'm naming them side by side, examples of community doing very well right now.
Tim showed us how communities form in real time. Groups of people coming together around shared purpose. But communities aren't always so visible. Sometimes they're quiet, almost invisible, yet just as powerful. Every time you pick up a book, you're joining a community with the author, with past readers, and with future ones. That's where Matt Karamazov comes in. He's read thousands of books, and he makes the case that reading is never just solitary. It's a community of ideas stretching across time. Now, you've mentioned your goal of 10,000 books. Why, actually, that goal?
You know what? I set a previous goal of reading 1,000 books before I turned 30. And then once I reached that goal, behind the mountains are just more mountains, right? So, what do you do when you've accomplished some big goal that's taken you, 10 plus years to do? You just set an even bigger, more ambitious goal. So I just jacked up the number even more. But the original goal actually came from a book that I read by Chris Guillebeau, and it's called The Happiness of Pursuit. and it's it's not a fantastic book, but it did change my life. It's worth reading in the sense that he discusses the power of organizing your life around what he calls a quest, like something to give yourself direction and meaning. And for him, it was traveling to 193 countries, and he did that before he turned 35, and that was his quest. And so the book is kind of, it's helping you discover a quest of your own. And so mine was reading 1,000 books before I turned 30, and then I accomplished it, just barely. I think maybe a couple of days before my 30th birthday, and so I finished that goal, and then I just immediately set another one. And if we keep on the life extension track that we're on, of people keep living longer and longer, hopefully I have to, once I reach 10,000, I have to jack it up again to 20,000. But we'll see where the world goes.
Now, with so many books and with that goal, how do you systematically kind of read these books, and not just read, right? But also you do notes and you try to process and you think about it. What's your system?
Yeah. Well, I've been taking notes on every single book that I've read since 2014. And that started with Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. That was the first book. And then I think the number 2 was The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. The third one was The Law of Power, or the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene. And just around that time, those 3 books, like there were so many fantastic things that I was reading, just in those books when I first started this quest. And this was even before I started the 1,000 book goal. This was just, I started keeping track before that, and then I just made it into more formalized quest after I read Chris Guillebeau's book. But I was just learning so many things, and I knew that I would just, like, I was going to forget. You can't trust your memory, and I know that before then I'd read who knows how many hundreds of books for school, or just for pleasure, right? But I knew that if I really wanted to hold on to what I was learning, I'd have to start taking notes. And so that's exactly what I did. So I've got dozens of pages of notes from 48 Laws of Power, and I think there's some books more than others. But basically, when there's a quote or an idea, basically anything that I never want to forget ever, and it just immediately goes into my notes. And I don't. So my more technical process, I try not to interrupt my reading, or like the flow of my reading as I'm taking notes. So what I'll do is I'll just have my phone with me. I'll have iNotes open just on my iPhone, and I'll mark the page where the note, or the takeaway or idea begins. Then I'll start with maybe the first couple of words from that sentence, like where it starts, and sort of where to find it on the page. And so by the time I'm finished, I'll have a list of page 74, and then how the paragraph starts, and it's all like that, however many notes that I take. And then I'll go back to each book, and I'll type them all out, and I'll write just a summary with the ideas and things like that. And I've been doing that since 2014, and now I'm up to 1,408 books, I think. And I'm trying to balance, not racing through them. Like, I'm the very first to admit, or to say myself, the number of books read is very much vanity metric. Like, it almost literally doesn't mean anything. I just find it motivating to keep track, and it does help me actually in my work, right? Even writing my newsletter, I'll have basically the content for my newsletter is directly from the books, or the notes from the books that I've read. And it's just having them organized by book and by year, and just in the order, and just having that all together, that whole system. It makes content creation a lot easier, makes retrieval a lot easier. I'm able to just go back and test myself on previous books, and things like that. So there's so many good reasons not to count the number of books you've read. Like, nobody has to do that, but there are a number of good reasons to that somebody might want to keep track, and I do. So.
And we'll drop the link for actually your Beehive newsletter, which actually
Right.
us over at the Autominute has supported in the past. We'll drop it in the description. Now,
You have.
over time, have you noticed, do you spend, I'm sure it varies per book, but you spend kind of just as much time on the note taking as reading the book, or actually even more?
depends on the book. So like, I mean, I even take notes on novels that I've read. In that case, I'd spend more time reading the actual book than um, you know than 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 doing my notes. But then there are certain books like 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. One of my favorite books. I've read that book 5 times, which
Mm.
is pretty insane. I have dozens of pages of notes from that book, and so yeah, that I've probably spent more on my notes. Even when writing about them. There's a few books that I take and I'll do more like in-depth book breakdowns for my newsletter and for my audience. So I'll spend a lot more time on those books. But then there are plenty of books that I just read for fun, and I even take notes from there though, because I mean, if it's even books that I just rip through because I'm enjoying them. There's certain phrases, quotes, even just an interesting way of putting things, like just an idea in there that I'll never want to forget ever. And even with fiction books like Fahrenheit 451, I've got pages and pages of notes from that book, and it's only, I think it's slightly less than 200 pages, or it's around 200 pages. And yeah, it's a novel. You can rip through it in less than a day. But I came away with just amazing number of notes and things that I like I said, I just never ever want to forget. And like you have to write it down. You just can't trust your memory.
And then in terms of those notes, do you find yourself kind of taking notes on kind of just the topic of the book, or kind of your reaction to those ideas, right? So what I find it like sometimes when I read a book, and it may not be maybe 100 pages or 50 pages, but sometimes, right, that perspective is different, and that changes, for example, how I think about certain things. And I find
Mhm.
myself taking notes more on how that changes how I think rather than just what's on the page, if you will.
Mhm. Oh, 100%. And a lot of times that's reflected in the summaries that I would write for the book. Occasionally, I'll mark something in my own words in the notes. The majority of my notes are direct quotes, and ideas taken from the book itself. But no, absolutely. I mean, there's more than 100, way more than 100 books that I view as like before and after books for me. Like
Mm.
I saw the world one way before I read that book, and then after I finished it, or even while I was finishing it, I see the world, or I experience something, or I think about something completely differently, and it is a before and after book for me, and there's been hundreds of those, so.
What's your opinion on actually writing notes in the book itself? I'm a big fan of that, though.
Yeah, I don't like. I'm not against it. All of my notes are on Google Drive, so I'll never lose them. Like I have them backed up and things like that. Actually, I mean, interestingly enough, so I don't write in the actual book, but I do think it's a fantastic idea because there's a definite sort of kinesthetic connection between handwriting and your brain, right? By handwriting your notes, and even like in the book itself, you will like literally remember the book better. Like I'm sacrificing some retention by not handwriting my notes. So I mean, it's definitely a good idea. Just because I don't do it doesn't mean I don't see the value in it. But for me, I'm thinking like you spend maybe 5 hours handwriting notes in this book, and then you move apartments, or like you move a city, like move cities, or there's a fire at your house, or something like that, right? And you lose those notes, and you just misplace the book, you lend it to someone, and they never return it. I couldn't handle that. So I've got all my notes digitized, just in a safe place. That's just how I think about it though.
Shifting gears slightly to, and I'm slightly envious of the library behind you.
Mhm.
How do you find these books? My library is not as extensive as yours. Yeah, how do you find these books? How do you acquire them? How do you get these books? Yeah, any tips on actually kind of acquiring a library, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing, start posting book content on the internet, and authors will send you books like you wouldn't believe. Even yeah, probably not half, but like a good number of the books on my desk, like in front of me right now, have been sent to me by the author just for free. Um, I buy a bunch of books, mostly from Amazon, local bookstores. They're upstairs actually, but I've there's a local bookstore that was going out of business, and I basically I just took a credit card and went there on their last day, and I spent maybe a good hour, and I left with maybe 10 or 12 books from that bookstore. So independent bookstores, things like that. I've also got a ton of books on my phone. I've got about 6 or 7 different book apps. Yeah, iBooks is a good one just with my iPhone. A lot of them are free actually, and you can buy some too. I do that as well. Audible. I do listen to some audiobooks, not as many as physical books. There's a book app called Everand. It's like a Netflix for
Mhm.
books. I like that one
Mhm.
too. There's some frustrating aspects of it. Sometimes they'll take a book out of your library for no reason, and just you won't be able to find it. But it's I like I like their interface and just how easy it is to read books. And you can set a bookmark on a certain page and come back to it. And
Mm.
a lot of my favorite books actually I've discovered on that platform, and books I'd never heard of, and it was just recommended. If you like this book, check out that book. For example, the Outsider by Colin Wilson, one of my favorite philosophy books. That is one that I found on Everend on that app just randomly, and I had never heard of this book before, and then it changed my life, like literally changed my life. So like all these kind of serendipitous finds as well. And then there's so many ways to find great books too. But even just inside the books that you read yourself. So every so often the an author will mention or recommend outright a book that they read for their research for their book, or some book that they're quoting or something, and I'll immediately take that out if it looks interesting, and I'll keep, like, I have a list of, I'm a big list nerd, but I have a list of high priority reads, books that, I can't wait to get to, and then sort of mid priority reads for ones that, kind of look interesting, but I'm not super excited about starting it. I'll put that on a list that I save for later. And so yeah, there's no shortage whatsoever of books that I could read, and so kind of I bring them in from different sources, and yeah, then you also kind of just you discover what you enjoy, and then you can kind of branch out from there. If you liked this book, ask somebody who's read it, or look it up online, and different books will be recommended or discussed in connection with that book. And then there's a whole different, it's an infinite labyrinth, to use a Borges image, just a books that you could read and find. It's literally never ending, that rabbit hole. So
Do you have a goal on actually how many books you want in your actual library? Because I only stick to physical books, and one of my goals is to build a very impressive library. I don't think I have a book count goal on how big I want my library, but do you and on the physical library bit?
yeah, I do actually, and I never did before. And so I don't have a fully formed goal to tell you about right now, but I can say that it's something that I was thinking about for sure. So I can definitely see myself in possession of a moderately large library at some point, but no concrete plans. Like, I'm not adding another wing to my house anytime soon.
Well, I was gonna say, is all the books, the 1,400, are the ones that are behind you right now, or actually there's more in some other rooms?
Oh, there's books littered everywhere, yeah, everywhere here, and then books on my phone, books from the library, books that I've just read once, and or borrowed from a friend, and just they're everywhere. So yeah,
Actually, yeah, I recall in your last video, and actually currently right now, you have one of my favorite books, The History of Philosophy, right behind you. It's also right behind
yeah.
me. It's a very, very impressive book. Out of all the books you've read, what is your favorite? And I know this is very tough. It's like having 1,400 kids and asking which one is your favorite one.
Yeah,
But what is your favorite book right now?
man. Without thinking about it,
Now,
I would
just now,
say,
on the
yeah,
spot.
the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas,
Okay.
and it's top 10 all time, probably top 5, out of 1,400 I don't see it being, kicked out of that top spot. Whether it's my absolute favorite, maybe, who knows? It very well could be. Yeah. But then there are honorable mentions too. We've got Meditations, Marcus Aurelius, the book by Alan Watts. That's another fantastic one. The Revolution from Within by Jiddu Krishnamurti. That's another favorite. Uh, what else? There's so many. Yeah, just a tremendous amount. Fahrenheit 451, Paradise Lost is fantastic. Faust, Johann von Goethe, just amazing book, amazing. Yeah, just a ton of them, just so many, too many to count, too many
kids,
too many favorites to I couldn't even. So.
But then that goes to the point. For someone to actually think about starting a collection and obviously not as much experience as you, having read so many books, would you argue, and you kind of allude to this point earlier, would you argue for someone that, again, starting this collection, would say just invest in a couple of those books, right? Meditations, Count of Monte Cristo, and really just read a book. You can read a book 100 times rather than having 100 books and reading it just once. So really focusing on maybe the classics and things that you can read rather deeply rather than have huge volumes of books.
100%. Yeah. And I like to strike a balance between both. But there is immense value, just immense, massive, in going back to the books that have changed you, transformed you already, and going deeper into them. Let's see, the Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. I haven't read that yet. I'm being pressured by a number of people to put it up higher on my reading list right now. But Naval Ravikant has read that book about 10 times or more. And, I from what I've heard of that book, I don't blame him whatsoever. And, there's, oh man, I mean, I read 12 Rules for Life five times, including listening to the audiobook version once, read by him. And that was immensely worthwhile. I get more out of it on that 5th time that it wasn't available to me. I wasn't looking for it that first time. And it's kind of like Heraclitus, the ancient Greek philosopher, how no person steps into the same river twice. Like, it's not the same river, you're not the same person. And it's the same book, except the book hasn't changed, but you have. Especially if you're going back to it, 10 plus years in the future, and which is kind of where I'm at now, where there's, books that I've read in 2014 that I just can't wait to come back to. I'm thinking of Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. That's actually one that I'm rereading this month. But that's actually that's a weakness of mine. If I more or less of especially if you have a goal to read a certain number of books,
yes,
you can, it's a very real risk that, I have to sort of defend against. The temptation to just, check them off a list so you can get to the next one, and it's just like, that's not the point. I'd rather fail in my goal than achieve it, but just kind of just rip through a bunch of books that, that don't mean anything to me,
I think it was Umberto Eco that said actually this quote, like, collecting books is like it's like having medicine in your medicine cabinet. So you just don't know when you might need it, right? But you want to have all these books, right? And so you might pick it up once and read it, and then you may not even read it, right? But the fact is, you have those books at your disposal, and you're able to kind of tap on that when I guess you're in that point of life where you kind of maybe need that particular book, and you may need that particular medicine multiple times.
Absolutely. Well, he had a personal library of about 30,000 books or something stupid like that. I mean, stupid in a good way.
Right.
And, Nassim Taleb also has this idea of the anti-library, of just basically a collection of books that you haven't read. And it's humbling in the best possible way, and I mean, every 100 books I read, I get stupider, really. I know stupider isn't even a word, but it's just, it reminds you how little you actually know compared to what there is to know. And that's kind of the point of having an anti-library, of just having a giant collection of books that you've never read. And it's basically you're forced to confront the fact that there's still so much. Like, you're still on page 1 of human knowledge, right? And like you're always on page one, and it's just massive. Like you'll never get to the end of reading.
Interesting.
There's certain things you can get to the end of, you can finish it, or you can master and then kind of move on, but you'll never master reading and then be able to just move on. Like it's a lifetime thing. And even how much I read, like I will never finish. And if you read maybe like if you one book a year, like you'll never ever ever finish. One book's way better than zero, but you'll never get to the end of it, and it just gets more exciting as you go along. Just as you start to make a whole bunch of different connections, in your mind. For example, like I just kind of random thing that popped into my head now, Faust. By Johann von Goethe, it's a play, but you can read it. He's basically visited by the devil Mephistopheles, and he appears to him as or in the form of a black poodle. And so there's another book by Mikhail Bulgakov called The Master and Margarita, and where the devil arrives in Moscow, and he arrives in the form of a person, and in the book he's carrying a cane with the head of a black poodle, which is a reference to Faust. And it's just like the connection, like I don't know, maybe that's not exciting to to people who aren't nerds like me, but you start to pick up on stuff like that when you read a ton of books, and it's this feeling of it's this shot of dopamine like that you get from discovering this or making this connection, and from learning something, and it's just there's no other feeling like it. And I can't even describe the number of times when there's like you never know when one of those sentences or ideas will pop up in a book. It could be on page 5, it could be on the very last page, and like, you literally never know. It could be on the very next page. There are so many times where I've stopped reading, and then I've come back to the book later, and then the very first page that I read after coming back, I read something just straight up life changing. You never know where those when those things are going to happen or where you're going to find them, and it's just like searching those out. It's terribly exciting, and for people who don't know that excitement, it's just I think personally they're missing out, but
I would agree. I mean, I've said to my daughter the other day, I read this one book. I read it once. I said, "This is rubbish." And then I said, look, I'll give that book another shot, right? So I read it again, and the second time was not as rubbish. I realized I was rubbish. And then the third time it got better and better, right? So it's
which book was this?
No names. It's actually one book that I had to do a review on. Switching to our last question, what do you think is You've read so many books, you're in this goal, 1,400 books, 10,000 books. How about your own book? When is it time to write that, and what do you think it will be about?
I've definitely thought about it. I think almost anybody who reads a fairly large number of books, I think sometime like it could, you never know when it's going to happen, but I think at some point they start to get the idea that, hey, maybe I could do this too. And I've definitely, that's happened for sure. I don't have anything that's like, I don't have a book proposal written or anything like that. It's not anytime soon. It's not going to be this year, and it likely won't be next year. But I've definitely thought about it. I think I have 10 plus books in me. It's going to be something in the area of literary criticism of some description. Something about it's going to be about books. Some of my favorite books are books about books. So it's going to be something like that. There's a few, like I'd like to eventually try writing a novel. I think that would be a really big challenge. I've read a lot of the fantastic, the great novels. I think I can, I have a ton of inspiration for that. Whether I don't, my first novel is not going to come close to Anna Karenina or anything like that. But I think it'd be a fun challenge.
Ambitious, but yes.
Right? It could be a fun challenge. I like to, I like to make something worth reading. I think I can do that. But yeah, I'd probably start with a nonfiction book, and it'll be likely about books, maybe something to do with the with business, like my content creation surrounding books. I've even thought about giving it the same title as my my newsletter, The Reading Life, which is the title of a book by C.S. Lewis, and about his reading habits, his reading life. That's where I got the name. So maybe The Reading Life. Who knows?
That would be the good start. And as you ease into your book writing career, and it's true, I think fiction is fundamentally very different. Hey everyone, a quick update here. We've just launched our Patreon community for the Down Low Show. This is a new way for us to share more with you, our listeners, behind the scenes, early drops, and experiments we're building out. If you've been following along and want to support what we're doing, come join the free community at patreon.com/thedownloadshow. It's brand new. It's our first step in growing something bigger, and we'll love to have you in from the very start. There are communities where patterns have to be spotted instantly, where the stakes are high and the clock is running. That's where horse racing comes in. At first glance, it's sport and gambling. But beneath the surface, it's a community built on intuition, shared bets, and an ongoing search for meaning in uncertainty. Alex O has spent years inside that world, and he shows us how horse racing can teach us about judgment, data, and the role of chance in our lives. So tell us a little bit, what is horse racing at its current moment? How has it evolved in recent years?
So, just as a background, horse racing started when there's a crossbreed of 3 different horses: the Turkish horses, the Arabic horses, and the British horses. And they all started racing against each other about 400 years ago. And so it was always a sport seen for the rich, because it was actually the monarchy of the UK, of England, that started races. So historically, it's always been like that. It's always been from there. And you can track all and every single horse's bloodline all the way there. So it hasn't had much change except for the rules and the prize money and the growth. And I think if you've seen historically, there's been a lot of different sovereign nations who've started racing, such as the sheiks of Dubai. There's a lot of Middle Eastern influence. The Chinese are starting to get into it. It's always been a Commonwealth type of sport, and I think it's been growing in popularity and expanded its reach. And so from a tech perspective, from a racing perspective, there hasn't been much change. It's really held on to its roots and traditions.
So in terms of, I guess, the most of the growth really has been, I guess, would you say it's more competitions, more prize money going into horse racing in general, or has that also been quite stagnant?
Yes, so horse racing has seen a huge uptick in prize money. That there's been more international competitions as well. So it used to be just turf racing, which means grass. But more of the racing from the US, from Japan, is starting to Korea, Saudi. They race on dirt as well. And some of the biggest prize monies come from there. So the sport has also evolved and had 2 different types of tracks and conditions. But if you actually look at where there's been big growth, it's the popularity and the crossbreeding of horses. So it's about what horse works where. And so different jurisdictions will try to breed the best horses they can by looking at the pedigrees and the bloodlines around the world and seeing which horses should be brought over, should be flown over to get certain type of attributes for the ground for their tracks. And so it's this game of not just winning a race, but trying to breed the best horse.
Now, as a horse owner yourself, right, I'm sure this is one of the key things you do look at: how to breed the horses, how to make sure you've got the best stock. searching all across the world for some of the best horse lines. What is transparent about that market, or actually is that market also not very transparent on which horses are the best and which horses to breed?
I don't think there's a best, in my opinion. It's what do you want to achieve? Like anything in life, you need to have a clear goal and objective. So, for example, in Hong Kong and Japan, we like speed. We care a lot about very fast horses, and we kind of are not as caring of stamina in Hong Kong. So Australia, Hong Kong have very fast horses. We look for pedigrees where horses run shorter distances. In the UK, they look for a bit longer distances, so they balance speed and stamina. So there's all these different things, and it's really nice because every horse that's born is not allowed to be born from artificial insemination. Everything has to be natural. And you have that whole pedigree line that you can track 400 years worth of generations. So you know exactly what you're getting, you know, and the pedigree. But pedigree is only a statistical point of information about what historically has been done throughout the family. It doesn't mean that they'll perform well. Just because my dad or my mom might be in a certain field doesn't mean I'm going to end up in that career either, right? So it's that, and then actually looking at the horse physically and saying, is this a horse that I like or not, right?
Now these horses, when you said it's not the best, I guess what you're saying is like it's also breed for certain places, or certain tracks might be better suited for certain horses, right? So I guess the ones that have a longer stamina, those would be better suited for longer courses, and then I guess the Hong Kong ones are relatively shorter, which is why those horses that have more sprinting ability are prioritized.
Yes. So we also look at different breeds of how we can crossbreed. So they're all the same breed. It's just the different pedigree lines. So do we put a sprinter sire, like a father, to a mother that's a stayer, which is a stamina base? How do you cross those lines, or do you stick with two sprinters and focus on getting the fastest horse possible? So I think it's an art, but it's also a science. But it's a science that hasn't been fully developed through technology. It's a science that's been developed through time and experience.
Mm. Now you mentioned actually one of the growth areas has been kind of the prize money in different markets. I think you mentioned Japan as well. How how is it growing in mainland China, where there probably isn't a history of racing, right? Like you said, I think this is more of a Commonwealth type of sport. How is it developing in China, and what differences are there, and how do they think about horse racing?
I think it's really fascinating because if you look at horse racing, thoroughbred racing, it's a Commonwealth sport, but it's starting to be dominated by a Chinese organization named Yulong. So Yulong was started by a man named Mr. Zhang, who came from Shanxi, and he just loved his horses. And so he went to Australia and built up from scratch a stud farm, so a stallion farm. And he bought up a lot of the best horses, and he's breeding. And now they're number one in Australia, winning all the big races and owning all the best horses. Now they've just tackled and moved to the UK and started their operations. So they're taking over the UK as well and getting the best horses, everything. And it's quite interesting and fascinating because when you think of countries, the Sheikh of Dubai runs
Yes.
Godolphin, which is a very famous racing organization, and they just shut shop in Australia and they've closed their organization down. So even they're downsizing because of, Chinese influences. They might have their own reasons, but Chinese influences are definitely growing. Now, if we talk about racing specifically in China itself,
Yeah.
it's a huge thing that is growing in popularity, but because of no wagering, it's a bit difficult to get prize money in. So horse owners probably pay a lot more for entry fees, and that is the pool for for the winners. So
Mm.
you, me, and a bunch of friends own horses, and we'll just pool our money together, and the winner takes it, right? So it's a
Mm.
very different model and system. So I think it will never become very professional until it expands and opens up, but the
Mm.
interest is there. And so when that happens, we'll see a huge growth.
And then, so from a popularity perspective, let's say aside from the wagering kind of side, from a consumer perspective of just racing horses, I mean, but there's no history or there's no historical precedent for it. But why do the Chinese enjoy horse racing?
Yeah, so there is historical references to horse racing. It's been there, but much longer distances. So if you look at Kazakhstan, Mongolia, northern parts of China, Central Asia, they do horse races, but we're talking about 50 to 100 kilometers, which is a very, very different sport. It's a stamina-based sport. While here, when we talk about horse racing, when we say long distance, it might be 3 kilometers. So we're talking very, very, very different sports. So there's always been horsemanship there. Now, why have they transitioned? I think just like everything in China, when we looked at them opening up, they want to perfect and be good at whatever they try to do. Look at microchips, look at the global economy, look at cars. When they do something, they try to do it right. And I think, with horses, they've seen an opportunity. They've seen it as a sport. It's something where the Arabs have gotten a lot of tourism and have been able to develop their brands through horse racing. And I think with China, there's a similar thought process, but it's also the fact that they want to enter the sport and, win. So I think there is growth in that aspect. And that's why, having the champion horse is such it's a feeling that you can't replicate. It's a feeling of being so high. You could win $100 million for a client and they'd still be not as happy as winning a normal horse race where they just lose it and they're crying from the joy and the experience. So I think that feeling and that chasing of that excitement is also part of it as well.
Interesting. So in that case, so there are, I guess there's a consumer want for horse racing, or at least kind of the high, and then the wagering, kind of the betting side. That's kind of, I assume that's kind of Hong Kong's stance in this whole thing, in that it could provide practice there. And I'm keen to kind of tie into Zach's presence in the number one jockey in the world, and his presence in the rap video from Sky, SKI, the Sky, the rapper. Is that really kind of Hong Kong's I guess competitive advantage? That is the place where China might have the market, mainland consumers might have the market, but they can always come to Hong Kong and do the wagering over here.
Definitely, it is a place similar to Macau, I think. But Hong Kong's horse racing is a bit different from the rest of the world because it's the only place that takes the betting revenue and turns it into charity. So they turn over $130-something billion per season, and that gets pumped into the Hong Kong economy. So it's been something that's very it's established, it's had a long legacy, and it's somewhere where everyone sees it as also charity and doing good. So I think it gets a good rep from that, and it is a place, it is an advantage, and I think Hong Kong's a very accessible location for everyone. It's very well managed, it's well maintained, it's part of the culture, it's everywhere. If you go on a taxi, you go on a bus, the bus drivers, the minibus drivers, everyone's on the radios on Wednesday nights, on Saturdays and Sundays, listening to the races. So it is, many generations of that, and I think people can appreciate that when they come over here. Now, from a marketing side, the head of the whole International Federation of Horse Racing is the CEO of Hong Kong Jockey Club as well. So Hong Kong has a valuable place in Asian racing, but also in the world, in determining a lot of the policies and where it should go. And so we have a huge advantage in that aspect.
Interesting. I can, for actually tourists that usually come to Hong Kong, Wednesday nights at the races is a big thing, right? To go and see the race and then be a part of the whole festivities. So I think, you might be right. That is actually one of our main advantages. Now, shifting a little bit over to the technology side, how is AI being integrated into horse racing from whether it be a performance analytics perspective, whether it's a wearables perspective, or even betting?
Yeah, so I think let me split that into three parts, talking about wearables, wage, betting turnover, and actual performance analytics. I think from the wagering side, Hong Kong has always been a financial hub. So when AI was introduced and data analytics was introduced, everyone jumped on the bandwagon of taking data from the horses and the betting turnovers and using that to try to get an edge of which horses are going to do well or not. So a lot of arbitraging, a lot of ideas on Dutch booking of how we can try to make this work. And I think that, unfortunately, some have worked, some have done well, but on a large scale, it's kind of changed the sport in a sense where everyone's following the money like a trader instead of actually appreciating the horses. So it is good and it is there and it's helped turnover. But I think the lack of understanding of horses is where it kind of has a downfall. So there's something that needs to be explained and developed. Most of it is mainly on how do the odds move? Where's the money going? So I think it fits Hong Kong completely. That's our personality. That's the ethos of Hong Kong, right? Where can you find value where others can? Now, if we talk about wearables, wearables have been around for almost 20 years. It's been around for a long time. So the issue with wearables is calibration and reliability. So if you think about a horse, 1,000-pound animal, making sure you get the right exact point where you can put a heart rate monitor and making sure that you get the right data and information is quite difficult. And is it scalable? These technologies are quite expensive. So if you have 1,500 horses, you can't really do that. If you have in Hong Kong, each trainer is only allowed about 70 horses. Having 70, monitors on each horse and being able to watch them, you don't have the staff to actually be able to monitor data collection. So I think those are big issues with wearables that are not addressed. And then the reliability, if someone misplaces the saddle or misplaces where the sensors are, will you get the data you want? And I think those are all question marks. And there hasn't been much progress since. And I think it's been used a lot in Australia. In Hong Kong, it's been quite disregarded in a lot of areas because of the scalability issues. So the third part, if we talk about performance, there hasn't been much done. So that's where I come in, and that's what I am trying to do with. I run a lab at the Hong Kong University where we study bioinformatics and analytics of their biomechanics, how they move, how they walk, and medical imaging. So that's where we're really trying to go and trying to push the envelope.
No, I like how you actually mentioned those in three parts. I remember actually on the very first part, on the betting side, the American that I believe is now banned by the Jockey Club because of the fact that I think he tracked over 100, 150, 200 data points on horse racing, and I believe he actually beat the house, if you will, pretty solidly. In terms of the performance side, that seems to be from also your work, and I think what you were saying, that seems to be kind of an area most people had not been focusing on in the past. How do you think that kind of area will change the industry and the sector as a whole in horse racing in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it needs to change because, as you said, it's seen as an old person sport. And from an entertainment perspective, people like data. If you look at football, it's also evolved quietly. XG, so expected goals, you have all these metrics. Obviously, the issue is how do you contextualize these metrics, right? They're not just buzzwords that get, like, for example, an XG or expected goal of 20%, so 0.2, with a defender shooting is not the same XG as a striker taking that shot. And so it's about how do we create these data modalities and metrics and look at conceptual measures that make sense and not just plug them in. Because if you think about horse racing, there's a lot of data. It's one of the only sports, if you think about, where in the middle of the races, between races, they'll measure the firmness of the ground and give a pentometer meter and reading, the weather conditions, the biases of the track, like where's the grass softer or not. There's so much information, and data is such a data abundant sport. And that's why there's some magic in it, is because of the complexity and the dynamism. Now, how do you encapsulate that into understanding for a younger audience, for, people who are looking to enter the sport? And then from the performance side, how do you take that data and make use of it into something that's useful, not just something we're measuring for the sake of measuring?
Hmm. Actually, on that point, right? Like, how many data points are these data points provided by, let's say, for example, a jockey club, or are these data points kind of provided somewhere else by some sort of external provider? And how many data points are we talking about, really?
Yeah, so this is provided every time there's a race. This is standardly provided by any race organization. So if you look at the sport, there's probably about 16 to 18 factors that influence a result. And that's on the simplistic side. So,
Right.
for example, how hard is the ground today? What's the weather conditions? Tactics, like who's in the front, who's in the back, the rails. The railings actually change in distance, which means, are you running a wider turn or a shorter turn? Is the track more narrow or more wide? That also influences. So there's all these things that are provided. It's just, how do you conceptualize that and put it into useful information for someone to really absorb that and understand? So, and if you don't do it for the general audience, you use it for people who are in the industry. How do you turn that into performance, right? How do you actually squeeze that information into something useful? So obviously it is useful. Obviously there's trainers, there's people who are professionals, and that's why they get paid. It's to be able to look at these and read the conditions and be able to come up with a way to win. Now, how do you encapsulate that and make it easier so that they can take that information more readily available?
Now, you also mentioned before that, that's one way to capture kind of young people in, is to make this more of a data type of sport, it's a little bit more accessible. What other ways do you think is necessary to capture, the young people, and again, make sure that this isn't considered an old person's sport?
Yes, I think especially in Hong Kong, which is different from the rest of the world, children are allowed in the rest of the world. So it is a family event. If you're a racing fan, if you're a owner, it doesn't matter. Everyone goes in and everyone enjoys the day with their family. So in Japan, people will camp outside of the race courses and have barbecues before the races. They'll bring their children. So it's a generational sport, if that makes sense. That's passed down. In Hong Kong, not so much, but I understand because of the betting. It's a very touchy subject, and you have to draw a fine line. And I think that's the first part. It's, how do you incorporate families into racing and bring young people in with the passion of the elderly? Secondly, it's, how do you evolve the sport and present information in a way that is easily digestible? Because I think the information, for someone who is in racing and loves it, they want as much information thrown at them and they can make use of whatever information they have. Now, I think different views of data and different views of information is necessary for the different groups and audiences that you're presenting. And I think the third point is, the most prevalent point is, being in a city, we lack a connection with animals. If you think about Hong Kong, we had SARS, which was a very bad influenza virus, and we basically got rid of all our farm animals. We've got rid of our chickens. So if you ask a kid from Hong Kong, what does a chicken look like, or when's the last time they've seen a chicken, they're going to tell you they saw chicken nuggets, or they saw pieces of chicken in a plastic box. And so how do you expect a younger audience who grew up with this type of environment without any animals and being in touch with nature to really have compassion and empathize and really love horses? It's a very difficult task, because I think people forget the sport is not just the horse running, but it's the horse themselves. And it's that passion for the animals that really makes the sport special. And so I think when we can solve these three issues, then we grow as a sport.
Actually, that's a really good point on the second point as well. I remember when you invited me to the race one Sunday, I was looking at the booklet and there were terms and data and numbers. Yeah, I'm used to lots of numbers, but I just didn't know how to contextualize all the numbers. And it was quite overwhelming. And there were just numbers flying everywhere that it could be even, it can be very inaccessible. Last question. Despite all this, and all the things, all the solutions you had proposed, what advice would you give to someone, someone young that wants to go into the sport? How would they go into it? How would they pierce the, the unknown and get into horse racing, if they so had the passion and so wanted to?
I think that's a great question, and that's something I've been asking myself. I think a prevalent way is maybe talking about myself and how I got into it, and then thinking about what is actually out there and how they could get into it and learn. For me, I was not into horse racing at all until after university. And the reason why was I studied politics, economics, and data science. So I was trained to look at data, contextualize data, and come up with an argument or finding insights that people might not have. And so when I came into horse racing, I didn't understand everything and I was overwhelmed with data, with odds, wagering. That was where I realized, wow, I love these animals and I've always loved horses, but I've never understood the sport. And so when I was able to get that data, it was just me exploring and doing a data science project. So I think that might not be prevalent to a lot of people, but there are a lot of people in finance and consulting, in a lot of professional realms who do deal with data. And I think I'd say give it a chance and try looking at the data sets, looking at the information that's out there and, exploring. But for someone else who does not have that background, who's purely interested in how do you get into horse racing, I think watching the races and actually going there and feeling the environment is something that is very, very prevalent and is very important. I think until you see a horse in the parade ring and you start building connection with horses, you'll naturally find areas to grow your passion. And I think the Jockey Club does a good job of providing information and education for if someone wants it. The issue is how do you make it accessible so that people know where to get it? And I think that the Jockey Club has done really well by, if you look at their Instagrams, they've been really pushing terminology and teaching people and creating content. It's something that we as an industry need to do better. And I think that one thing we might be able to do is have open days and really have people explore and learn. But go to the races, watch the races, meet people, chat to people and actually look at the horses and, get close to them. And I think that's how people fall in love with.
Actually, one additional question. Who is your favorite horse?
Yes. I mean, if we don't talk about, my own horses, for me, there was a horse named Urban Sea. And Urban Sea it's a huge triumph because she was owned by a Hong Kong lady. And she won the biggest race in the world at the time, which is the Arc de Triomphe in France. So whoever wins that race becomes a stallion, like a horse that can breed. But it was a female horse that won. So this family was the first ever Hong Kong, the first ever Asians to ever win this big race. And then that horse bred two champions. One was Galileo and one was See the Stars. See the Stars was owned by the same family, and he won the Arc. And now they're chasing a third generation from that pedigree line to win the Arc again. And they ran second last time. So they're very close. And this is huge because to have a Hong Kong owner from somewhere with 7 million people to do that, it's amazing. And Galileo has become the number one sire in the world. Hands down, most valuable horse. He's had the most champions ever. So if you think about it, if you look at, horses, pedigree and everything, it all started from one Hong Kong lady. which is really impressive. And it's a moment of pride for us.
And if horse racing is about navigating financial risk, medicine is about navigating human risk at the highest stakes. Doctors have always formed communities of practice, learning from one another, sharing cases, and building trust. Now, AI is stepping into that circle, reshaping how those communities work and how decisions get made. That's where Dr. Junaid Gurji comes in. He's working at the intersection of AI and healthcare, and he explains how this new kind of medical community is being built. So fantastic presentation. You presented to actually a whole stream and a whole cohort of, I think, more than 100 doctors and practitioners and educators in the medical field. Now, you started off the presentation with prompts and prompt engineering, quite expansive and quite kind of back to basics. But yet, I think you ended up with this framework, this prompt framework called MEDDIC. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what you think about some of the things that you covered? What do you think about kind of some of the general prompt frameworks, and why do you settle on MEDDIC, and why is that different from, and why is that actually not just different, but more effective than some of the frameworks you've seen around?
Sure. So there's lots of different frameworks out there, actually. To be honest with you, you and I had talked about using RACE, RACE framework. And there's different ways to approach RACE framework as well. I would say that, if you are used to using RACE framework, you're someone who has been using AI for a while and understands that the prompt needs to be as specific as possible. When you're not used to doing that, another framework is called MEDDIC. Now, MEDDIC, the M stands for mission, the E stands for expected outcome, the D stands for the details of what you are looking for, the I stands for instructions, and C stands for customize. So for the mission part, you really want to identify the goal and the purpose of the prompt. For expected outcomes, you really want to be as specific about the format and the structure of the prompt. Okay. For the details, that's when you start to tell the GPT or the AI or whatever large language model you're using that what are the level of your learners, what topic are you talking about, what are the competencies you're looking to achieve. In instruction, you're looking to set the tone: professional, business casual, serious. What are some of the constraints? What do you want the user to be able to do and not do? And then customize, you want to align and contextualize the session. So you want to say, I'm a pediatric hospitalist working on a busy hospital service, and I've got medical students and residents working with me, and I want to discuss X, Y, and Z case with them. So by doing this, by setting up the MEDDIC framework, it allows you to be more specific. And as you and I both know, specificity in terms of the prompt gets you a better outcome.
Now, in terms of that presentation, you went into some of the examples that other hospitals and hospital groups have been using to show, the doctors and educators that, these are other kind of uses and applications of AI in the medical field. What are some of the most impressive things that you've seen recently that other groups are doing? Either particularly impressive or just really innovative?
So if we think about AI, many of us right now, you and I are talking about frameworks and prompts, and that's what you would use to help you make chatbots. Okay. There's other uses of AI as well. One of the most impressive uses of AI is to help do prediction, risk stratification of patients. And one of the nice things is that, one of the more challenging things in pediatrics is, how do you know when a patient is about to go south? Um, and how can you predict that? Well, we have labs, we have physical exam, we have vital signs, we have the history that give us a gestalt about what's going on with the patient. And then we make our predictions based upon this information. And we see patients at snapshots in time, right? And so we're supposed to, the art of medicine is supposed to use those snapshots to determine if a kid's going the wrong way or not. One of the most, I think, elegant ways of using AI is to help with that risk stratification at the beginning, and then how it follows your patient along throughout its hospitalization to determine, oh, that's when your patient's about to go down. You need to intervene now. And, you know, at our institution, we use Epic as an electronic medical record, which is, it's pretty much used worldwide. And I think it's Nationwide Hospital up in Ohio. They developed a nice AI, basically a crawler that crawls through each patient's chart in real time and will help you determine based upon values of labs, vital signs, information in the notes to determine if your patient is becoming septic or not. And that's very key actually, because a septic patient can go down very quickly. So in terms, for me, that's elegant. I would say another use of AI in terms of risk stratification is to determine, you know, will a patient need supplemental oxygen for their breathing difficulties, or do they need a certain medicine or not, like albuterol? And does this patient need the ICU versus can they be kept safely in the community hospital? Again, that risk stratification has financial implications too, because if you make the wrong judgment or decision, you might be sending them to the ICU prematurely, which then they didn't really need to go. Now the patient has bought a transport fee, a new hospitalization fee, an ICU fee, versus if the model could tell you this kid can be safely kept in the risk or the likelihood of this patient needing the ICU is low, you can keep them in the community and save that money for the patient as well, the hospital system as well.
Very interesting. So I guess the term is called risk stratification, and I guess understand the risks earlier on. Is this so? In theory, I guess as long as the AI has access to hospital records, patient records, it can. I mean, I guess it can. It perhaps may do certain things better. It may detect cancer slightly better. Or flus better, I guess, depending on the quality of the data and the records. Is it as simple as that, or is it slightly more complex?
I think it is more complex, but what you're saying is that's the foundation. You know, I think I just read an article, I think like a week ago or a couple days ago, where AI is helping the people who make the flu vaccine. It's already being able to help them make better decisions than when they were before using AI, right? And it's not just having access to patients' charts. You know, which binding site is going to be the right one for this year, or at least the highest likelihood for this year. And there's a lot of algorithms out there that help determine that. And that's where AI can definitely step in terms of like flu vaccine use. But like in order to have something to work, you have to have a good database, and the database is the patient's charts.
Yeah. And actually, let's talk through that a little bit more as well. The implementation of this. So does that mean that, I believe you said, I think Ohio Hospital Group, do they have like an in-house kind of AI department
I'm
that's
sure they
thinking
do.
about this? Okay,
I'm
got
sure
it.
they do. I'm sure.
Okay.
You know, and they will probably be working with the makers of Epic to integrate that AI system into it. You know, you can't just make it like a custom GPT and say, I want it to work with Epic. It's not going to work like that. You have to integrate it. And I'm almost certain that Epic itself has its own AI department that if you have an idea and it's a worthy idea, that they would work with you to develop that idea.
And then in terms of implementation as well, so there's the records, and as long as the doctors keep on adding to that database of adding to new records, making sure that it's accurate. But I guess there's less and less that the doctor individually does that's subjective, right? It's more and more, I guess, quite objective, whether you have vital signs, whether I'm not quite sure, vital signs, certain measurements, those are kind of the doctor's role, I guess, is more and more objective. So essentially, it's high quality data that Epic has.
Yeah, it is. It's got objective data, like you said, vital signs, labs. It's got you could call the radiology needs, objective data as well, right? You may have tissue sampling, pathology reports, and utilizing all that information, you can generate, at least what we call a differential diagnosis, meaning I think that this kid probably has these 3 or 4 things, and I need time to determine which one it is. And that's where AI can certainly help.
Has there been, sorry to
Good.
interrupt you, but Dr. Gurji, has there been any research to show that AI is better at these differential kind of recommendations? Sorry, I forgot the term. Differential
diagnoses.
Diagnoses. Is AI better than human practitioners?
So I'm going to answer this question very carefully. At the end of the day, AI is just an algorithm, right? Nothing will take the place of a good history and physical exam. AI cannot do those 2 things. Okay. The type of questions you ask, the way that you place your stethoscope, the feel of which you have the feel of the abdomen upon your fingers, AI can't do that. So, is it going to be better? I think what it's going to allow you to do, it's going to allow you to access this information much faster, right? So you may have an idea about your top 3 or 4 things, and maybe AI gives you that 5th thing that you're like, oh yeah, I definitely need to pay attention to that too, right? But in terms of medicine, AI will never take away what we humans have, which is the touch and being able to ask the right questions.
So it's like in the popular series House, there'll be a bunch of people thinking that there is indeed a problem, and instead of taking 1 episode to figure out what the problem is, it'll be a couple seconds. But at least the humans will know that there was a problem and there is a problem.
Yeah. There's a very, very good AI resource out there right now for physicians. It's called Open Evidence. And actually for all US physicians, it's free. It's by the Mayo Clinic. It is excellent. It's an excellent resource. And what I mean by that is you can type into it, you can say, my 6-year-old patient came in with these symptoms. What's the differential diagnosis? And it will do that for you. And the best part is it has been trained, its databases have been trained only on high quality journal articles and reviews. So the likelihood that you're going to get a hallucination is very, very low from something like Open Evidence.
Now, shifting gears over to ethics, which we were kind of skirting around anyway, and that was actually one of the kind of key sections in the presentation you just made. What are some of the top ethical considerations of practitioners and educators in the medical field these days?
Because AI, and I'm using that word very loosely, because AI allows us to access information very quickly, you have to wonder what are going to be the ramifications of that, right? Am I accessing this information quickly just to get my work done quickly so that I can have fun? Or am I accessing this information quickly so I can move on to something that's less administratively burdensome so I can actually learn this other information better? Am I accessing this information quickly so that I can make it write my scientific papers very quickly so I can turn it into the publisher very quickly and beat out my competition? So you can see that there's a lot of ethical ramifications to using AI. I would say, there's some key ethical principles at stake when you talk about AI. You talk about accountability, justice, non-malfeasance, beneficence, veracity, and autonomy, and even fidelity. And I would say in science, like as a scientist, you really do have to worry about all of them, honestly. But nowadays, like the journals that you publish at, they have very strict criteria that they will say, we do not want you to use AI to help you write your paper. And some of them don't care, right? In medicine, you can imagine that if you utilize AI to help you come up with a treatment plan, you had better be an expert in your field already to make certain that what the AI is telling you is not a hallucination that could actually cause harm. Because, for all of us that go into medicine, right, the first law is do no harm. And so you have to make certain that the tool that you're using will not allow you to do harm. And so again, I think that you have to use AI in a manner that helps you learn, but you're not becoming dependent on it. Because at the end of the day, you may be working for an institution that allows you to use AI, and then you might transfer to a different job where you don't have access to any of it. And so you really do have to have that information up here. Okay. But there's other uses of AI, like we talked about. There's AI to help you, am I missing something in terms of my differential diagnoses? Can AI help me scribe my notes so that I can spend more face-to-face time with my patients? I don't have to worry about that administrative stuff. Can AI help me sift out which patient is going to go south before they actually do? So there's a lot of good that AI can do for us, but you always have to double check it. You always have to. And I think that's a great deal about the ethical part as well, right? You have to double check, but you also have to make sure that what you're using it for is actually uh, ethical for what you're trying to do.
Right. So on the kind of differential diagnosis kind of example, you can have as much AI helping you on the diagnosis and giving different kind of ideas on what the diagnosis may be, but ultimately the person that makes the decision is the physician, and that person both has, I guess, the moral duty, but also, I guess, the legal duty to do the right thing, and that's probably not going to change in the foreseeable future.
I agree. I do not see that changing, because at the end of the day, that's my signature on the patient's chart. That's my order I placed. It's not the AI's order. I have to hit the button to sign it. And that's my medical license as well.
Do you see that as, to your point, I'm trying to tie this with, the accuracy. If the accuracy of AI in diagnosis based on Epic records gets higher and higher, let's say for very specific use cases, flu, 99% accuracy. Do you still see the role of doctors as still being integral, because ultimately they are the ones signing off ultimately?
Yes. I will take your question and reframe it a different way. Do I see AI taking over doctors' jobs and making them obsolete? And the answer is no. I do think that as the specificity and sensitivity of these algorithms goes up, it will demonstrate to everybody that at the end of the day, you still have to have someone sit in front of that patient, ask them the right questions, and do a proper physical exam, which is something that AI still cannot do.
Now, last question. Again, great presentation. For the educators listening now on this podcast, and we'll actually link to the presentation if we can. yeah, for educators who actually want to that want to experiment, and medical practitioners who want to experiment with AI, what do you recommend as a first small step that's somewhat innocuous and that's safe and fun, I suppose, that will give them the biggest impact?
If you're a medical educator or just someone who just wants to get your feet wet, um, you really do have to learn how to talk to these models, whether it's ChatGPT, Llama, Copilot, whichever you're choosing. The reason why is you can't just ask it what's the diagnosis for the kid that has fever and cough. It's going to use its own knowledge base and come up with something that might be true and something definitely that might be false. And so you do have to practice prompt engineering. ChatGPT is free, right? I mean, you have a certain amount of tokens, but it's free. You can practice there, and if you're, what we said in our grand rounds was check which large language model your institution uses. Because let's say you do have a good idea and and you want to develop something, it would be a shame for you to develop a good prompt that's working on one large language model only to find out that your institution actually uses a different one. Because copying pasting one prompt to another large language model doesn't translate properly. You have to do a lot of training, and it doesn't work the same way. And so figure out which large language model your institution does use or will allow you to use, and practice there.
Falls on building communities of people, to Matt Karamazov on the community of books, to Alex So on the community around horse racing. And finally, to Dr. Hune Gurji on medicine and AI. These voices all remind us that communities come in many forms. And together, they show us that the future isn't just about new technologies or shiny trends. It's about how humans, and increasingly machines, connect, share wisdom, and face uncertainty side by side. If you enjoy this relay of conversations, subscribe and join me again on the Download Show, where we keep exploring unexpected connections.